Anyway, it has been a return of winter today. I actually saw snow today. April 10th. We've had a month of like what I thought was the end of winter, and been walking around with friends saying, "Vesna tut nareshti." Spring is here finally. Not today. No, it's actually very, very cold. So trying to get a couple of bits here in order for our master super checklist of what we do. And there we go. That's the faster version of what I want. Anyway, just banged out an article that because a friend of mine um, who got into it with a loon, and I noticed that there's an error in it. My title has been repeated for some reason on my article. Bear with me. I'm going to make live editorial adjustment because I write my stuff on Word doc. I do all my stuff in Word docs, or not simply Word doc, Google Doc, Word doc and Google Doc, so that I can sit at my cafe and kind of pin away at stuff back and forth. And this is proof yet again that I see Patty has joined us. For instance, Patty, you're the victim of the night to be featured in front of everybody. Hello, Patty. We have two Patties in the room. We have Patty K. Barnes and Skip Intro and Nicholas and Adam is here. And so Patty, my friend Patty, who's a great friend of mine, she got into it with a really stupid disinformation account about Yanukovych being a Kremlin puppet, and through no fault of her own. There's nothing wrong with the term she used, Kremlin puppet. That's fine. But it made me step back and go, and this is the benefit of living in country and doing this work for many years. Is I've been on this Yanukovych case for a decade at least, and in pondering how to explain what Yanukovych did, especially the nuances of 2013, September into November 2013, I've been working on a book on informed napalm, and I have all these, shall we say, hacked and exfiltrated emails from the Ukraine Cyber Alliance, and so I pour over a lot of the data and these emails relentlessly because you can't relearn history enough. You need to do it if you're a very disciplined student about learning. You go over it and you go over it and you go over it. Always go back to the basics. And because I'm actually working on different figures besides Yanukovych, and by the way, Shaun Pinner will join us here shortly. We'll have our weekly report, but I live in this data every day. First off, I live here in Ukraine. I live here in Kyiv. I'm actually never very far from where these events actually transpired. And there's so many, little bitty micro widgets about it. So one person says, "Oh yeah, well, when did this magically happen? Since he was for the EU pact before he wasn't." I made it really simple. November 9th, 2013, when he went to have a meeting in Moscow with Putin and came back within a few days and reverse course. And more importantly, reverse course against the will of the Ukrainian people. How do you know? Because there's no one here. No one here walks around going, "Where's my Yanukovych? I want my Yanukovych back." It is not a thing. And the disinformation account, which has no followers, essentially, but it does work in that ecosphere. It had poured this information out and said, "Good evening, Holding and Karen and others. Norma has joined us, and Frank, and the uh, the evidence is overwhelming. What happened with Yanukovych, and it will never be at the end of the disinformation channels. But you got to get down certain aspects of it. So, in doing so, there's a term that had run around me before that it's not really sort of like the terms we're used to, like useful idiot and Russian asset or Kremlin asset, and these different terms. We're very used to these terms, and they're fine. There's nothing wrong with those terms. But converging actor, what is it that he was doing? Because in many ways, Yanukovych was operating on his own sails. There was personal ambitions in what had come out of basically the Donbass powerhouse of criminal oligarchs. And that's why in part of when I'm doing this work, I'm thinking less about trying to revisit a decade ago, 12 years ago now, actually, and thinking about what does it mean for Donald Trump and others. But we'll use Donald as the example. And he is similarly often argued about by, was he a useful idiot? Is he a willing participant? Is he a fellow traveler? All these terms we used in the past. And in many ways, he's in the same boat as Yanukovych was. They happen to have had the same campaign manager, in case you don't know, in case you forgot, Paul Manafort, convicted criminal. Um, and so the convergent actor concept, I think, makes a little bit more sense, perhaps, because it shows how the personal ambitions of someone who just happens to align perfectly with the ambitions of the Kremlin, the needs of the Kremlin, comes together. So, Patty, you get credit for generating that article today. And then it's actually on the boot of the one that I couldn't let go of last night. I got really ticked off at a veteran who has 1.5 million followers on Twitter. And he had a Russian disinformation talking point guest on last night. Both of them are American veterans. One's a former CIA guy, and if you know anything about my contempt for former CIA guys like Larry Johnson and others, you can't throw these titles at me. You can't say so and so was like if you say, well, but so and so is a former FBI. I will list two or three guys that I think are absolutely great, and then I'm gonna go over to someone like what's his name? There's a guy. God, suddenly I'm intentionally forgetting his name. James Gagliano. James Gagliano, who turned quite MAGA, So for every good person out there that's from an agency or for former military has the same issue, there's someone else who really kind of lost their way. For every general I like, there's a Michael Flynn. And that's just a really part of the rough reality. So another article that came out this morning that I went through the entire transcript with Pete Blabber and Sean Ryan was called "How to Make Up Shit About Russian Terrorism Against Ukraine." And in many ways, these are me going to the gym, trying to really keep my kung fu on the topics very fresh, especially since a lot of times people will say, let's see, telling Shaun Pinner, I'm already on, so he'll be in here in a minute. But trying to work the muscles on these topics to where when you get into that debate with your friend, or you run into someone who does not understand these histories, that you have a half a fighting chance of trying to pick them apart and keeping these facts in order. And I really do feel, especially as an American who's lived here for 4 years. Um, that I don't know how I would feel if I had never come here. I don't know how if I would feel if I had only been here a little bit and then went back, or some of my friends who are great supporters who come back and forth all the time, but they don't live here. They're not surrounded 24/7 by not simply Ukrainians and the Ukrainian life, but the chance to keep internalizing this knowledge and data. And for me, it's pretty much what I do. It's moja robota, is my job. And I hope you'll appreciate those articles that are up there for you. I did squeeze in one it's not really an article. I put in one little culture post I felt was needed today. Rasil Khalil talking about the Crimean daira, which is a frame drum. If you remember last night, I was telling you I own over 100 variations of this style of instrument. We're talking 4,000 years of history in the human race. If you read Exodus, they'll say Miriam crossed when they crossed the Red Sea. Miriam played the tof, the TOF, the tof. Basically the same type of thing, a frame drum. So I put up an article there for you guys, and it's a little video clip I happened to run across today, and threw that together. And then we have our wonderful brother Shaun, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Tell us. I was telling him a little bit about some of the articles that are out now, and just now that we have a split screen going on.
Yeah.
By the way, really cool thing to tell you guys about Substack. On my phone, I have it vertical, so I'm in one frame at the top, and I got Shaun. But on my desktop, I'm on the left side and Sean's on the right side. So it's a really smart machine to figure out how to put us on here. But how are you doing, brother?
All right, mate. Yeah, really good. It's good to
Yeah?
be back. We've had a really good week, to be honest, considering everything that's effing gone on. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
crazy. But yeah, I've had a really good week. You've been filling in because I'm a bit late.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was just telling about some articles. Here's our current air raid
Oh,
condition, and
yeah.
it's actually not what you're used to. It's a little lighter lately. And people ask me, Sean, and let me pass it to you as someone who lives here with this a longer history of living here, which we'll come to about part of our topic tonight. But people keep asking me what I think about whether or not the fight with Iran, with Donald throwing his little
Dude,
temper
oh.
tantrums in the Middle East, is it affecting Russia's calculations here? Because I mean, clearly we've had attacks, we've had kills, in people, civilians killed in parts of the countries that traumatize us that live here. And if you ever see the videos of a man screaming for his mother in Kherson after,
Mm.
that'll get you, or there's something wrong with you. But what do you think about the change in the weather, shall we say?
Uh, well, that's quite a lot to unpack there. I mean, from a personal level, it's definitely had an impact on, I would say, where I live in Dnipro. I mean, it's been pretty
Hmm.
quiet since I've been
Right.
home. I got home sort of from the UK earlier this month, and it's been unusually quiet. We had a jet drone
Hmm.
come into an apartment block, but that was pretty much it. There's not much. It's all been on the outskirts. Certainly, I would say it's had an impact here. Certainly, I know that the terror campaign is escalated since Iran, as we
Hmm.
talked about before. There's more emphasis on uh, terrorism now. You saw my post today about the SBU arresting the guy who was
Thank
another
you.
guy who was going to, shoot an officer, high-ranking officer. So
Hmm.
um, they're monitoring this, but the attacks, and not just from us and what we've been saying, but other journalists are covering you know, the curse on safari, the hitting the trains, the buses. There,
Right.
there's nothing off limits now for the Russians. Yet nothing's been said anywhere. It's
Right.
not in the mainstream media. It's not being condemnation and the people who you would expect to condemn this or tell people to slow down and de-escalate the terror campaign. It's just not happening. The
Right.
UN's just not there. Where's the Red Cross? Where's the United Nations in any of this? They're not saying
Right.
an absolute thing. So all these people that are regulating this are just dead quiet, and that's now led to not so much as Russia actually having a breakthrough or having some success on the front lines, because we'll go on to it a bit later, because politically, uh, you know, that's as good as having a breakthrough on the front lines, because you don't have any casualties. You can get the same effect. You can, stop support coming into Ukraine from the European Union if you're
Hmm.
Hungary. You can, you can benefit from a war in Iran. Even I question that now. I mean, it's only Ukraine that's hitting the refineries that's stopping Russia from really benefiting from those high oil prices. So,
Right.
so but at a local level, yeah, it's been exceptionally quiet here. But yeah, the summary that the terror campaign has gone up. That nothing's off limits to the Russians anymore. They're hitting everywhere, every
Hmm.
apartment block, train station, trains, buses, and that's getting worse.
Yeah, actually, and there was a discussion in the last few days about an Easter ceasefire. And Putin's comment, I think, was important to notice. First off, thank you to our friends who are joining us. We already have 17 in here. I'm going to remind our friends of something up front. I'm going to be the guy who does this. Ready? I'm sorry to make you so uncomfortable, Sean. You're a great guy. Subscribe to Sean's account, and if you want to be in the really cool category, get a paid subscription. apparently your paid subscription situation was not wired a certain way.
No, no, we had a technical difficulty, and I never really was interested in it. Do you know what I mean? I didn't really. I'm new to Substack, so it's like, and this, I'm not very good
Right.
at asking for
Well,
money.
I
So
have no
I
problem
just
for
poked
it
there.
because I value you in our journalism world, and so therefore I will say up front to everyone who isn't already subscribed, subscribe to his account. And if you are subscribed but in the free category, consider at least a five
Thank you.
dollar
Yeah,
payment. And if you can do that $80 for the year thing, or even better, consider doing so. So let me put that up front. Also, just thank you to all our friends for joining us. It's 9:02, and some people like to do the little algorithm intro. 3, 2, 1. Dobry вечер, everybody. Live from Kyiv and Dnipro, we have Shaun Pinner with us tonight. This is Voices from the
Привет.
Front and the wiretap joining you live to talk about how things are. So привет, привет, and
And I'm
because
joining
that's
you in my. I've got a white wine tonight. I got Chardonnay.
and I
I'm
have
joining you in
my
a bit.
because I can never get enough sugar in my system, which is absolutely terrible for all my future. But this is actually a Georgian brand cream
Okay.
soda that mm, I really love these. I only buy about one per week. Coca-Cola is my go-to, and I'm kind of kicking that. So anyway, that being said, the ceasefire he said would be starting tomorrow, and we actually woke up to at least some recon drones in the area this morning. There were attacks actually throughout this week, though, here in Kiev. There were at least a few, and they're mostly in the northern side of the city. I don't think there's enough target-rich environment, or where I'm at. They've destroyed my power facility. We're actually back to blackouts. We had blackouts yesterday, woke up without electricity this morning again, largely because the solar farms, I did not know this until a couple of days ago, the solar farms were picking up a good chunk of the energy consumption that we were needing. And with the raising of the temperatures, the need to heat had gone down. A lot of the drain on the electricity had gone down, but also we had more sun, therefore we had more solar farms. And it's cloudy now, and it's almost like winter. It was 30 degrees out a while ago, or whatever you Celsius people say. So it's cold, and therefore the drain on the system was kicked back in a little bit today. So
Well,
that's
I
been,
mean,
yeah.
I'll jump in there quick.
Go for it, of course.
Literally, in the world of battery banks, diesel generators, and inverters, and everything else, if you've got the money, generally it doesn't have the same effect. In Dnipro,
Hmm.
I hardly see it anyway because we're quite, as you can see, I've got my lights on.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't really see it so much because we've got an inverter in the garage that lasts probably 2 or 3 days if the better power does go.
Hmm.
But even through the winter, it wasn't really a struggle. We had battery banks. We got solar panels on the roof to heat the water. We don't really have. We don't feel it, but those Soviet style blocks of flats that you've just seen. You see they don't have that. They're not affluent. They don't really have the funds to do that. Even in town, there's like a cafes and buildings where you can go and get your batteries recharged, your battery banks down. You can get your mobile signal. You can get some food kitchens. So generally,
Right.
Dnipro isn't really, I would say, a city that's under stress, even though it's 2 hours from the front line. So
Yeah.
it doesn't have that same impact. And I was saying through the winter, it's not going to work. This is a
Right.
recycled Soviet plan that's just not going to work. Yeah, there's some discomfort. Yeah, but you put that in context to guys fighting on the front line in -30 with no, you know, debating whether or not they should light a fire because that gives their position away, or
Thank
having
you
some
for
hot food, you
exactly.
know.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that's one of the things that people may not recognize is that, like, I think about the fact that in the villages, or at least outside of Kyiv, you can do generators and things that we can't do in these buildings. I'm on the top floor of a very tall residential building. Everything around me is residential buildings. It is impossible for us to create that situation without a carbon monoxide or other problems. So we literally are
Mm,
dependent upon the systems here in the major part of the city. And this is true of Kharkiv, Lviv, Dnipro, Odessa, even when you're in the residential buildings. Okay. But when you get a little further out and you have the ability in some of the houses, like I have friends who live in the little towns around here, like Bucha is on my mind today because it was 4 years ago today I was in Bucha for the first time the last couple of days, I should say, of the 8th, 9th, and 10th of 2022, and those are house level, and you can put out. I have friends who live in these areas that you can put out a generator outside, but as you said, when it comes to our soldiers, they're not in that situation.
No, it's a minor discomfort, and I've always looked at that, and I'm always very conscious through the winter of what I was going through at that point
Yeah.
when I was there. I mean, you're on a calorie deficit. It's freezing cold. It's -30, and these guys are out there doing it day in, day out. I think they're better equipped through the winter than the Russians to deal with it. Firstly, they're in their own back garden, so they're going to fight harder.
Hmm.
Secondly, you can come off the front and still have a hot meal somewhere. It's not like I remember from the British Army where everywhere I fought was green zones and patrol harbours, and you couldn't go out anywhere or do anything. You had to stay within your sort of boundaries.
Hmm.
It's a slightly different battlefield scenario here, but
Yeah.
but yeah, generally it's a minor discomfort. I chuckle at anybody that sort of says, oh, we haven't got power. No, no, no. Okay, why don't you just have a winter barbecue if you can't cook anything? I mean, it's that easy. You just put a barbecue on, you go out in the back garden,
Right.
whether you've got a big garden, small garden, a stove, you can go cook a barbecue. So
Yeah.
and when you do get power, you cook for 2 or 3 days. It's not. It's a minor inconvenience at the moment. It's and it's now sort of the sun's here. I was walking around in shorts today.
Yeah.
And going around. It's not
I
a real
was this
hardship.
week, and not today as much. Today, the Scottish Viking took a break. Uh, for whatever reason, it's not kicking in. I went outside. I'm like, I'm not ready. Yeah, I had already kind of turned my inner thermal Viking off. Um, but it is. You know, One of the things I want to address tonight a little bit with our viewers, and again, thank you for everyone for being here, is that
Yeah, thank you.
Ukraine has we have a 4-year active war reality. Our conditioning is, I'm sure, radically different than most human beings, unless it's people who've been living in other war zones in the world, which is true for certain areas. People must remember if you live in Lebanon or certain places that are pure shit shows. Um, but I think the reason why I want to bring that up is I think that we still have so many viewers and friends abroad who sort of lack what we have as internal wiring. I mean, we are auto wired for things that are now, subconscious survival instincts. And
Mm.
so, how we think of policy, how we think of things like this little sliver of land, and that's what I want to pivot to is, we hear these terms completely different. Like he said, what? He said what? Bled.
Oh,
So
you're talking about JD Vance and
I'm talking
his
about
comment.
JD Vance, and it brings me to something, and I'm gonna put you on the spot, and because it really burns my blood differently when it's someone like you who's special to me as a friend, and also my friends who have occupied territory families, split in half no less, is that you are directly affected by this sliver of territory argument.
Yeah, I
Not one,
mean,
and
it's.
with
I
Larissa,
think
it's not once but twice.
it is. It's. I think his comments they're just haggling over, a few square kilometers. It
Hmm.
is just political framing. I mean, it's just it's trying to speed up a resolve which doesn't take into consideration that firstly it's not down to the kilometers. It's just
Hmm.
not. This is involving 6 million in occupied territories.
Thank you.
Now he wants to give up another chunk of territory that essentially is going to basically give an ultimatum to those people whether they want to be under Russian control or whether they're going to be under Ukrainian control.
Hmm.
So this isn't about just giving up, a small amount of kilometers and they're just haggling over it. This is about a country that's invaded its neighbor, who's put in Nazi-style filtration camps And the minute
Absolutely.
let's say we did give up that for peace, right? We
Mm-hmm.
did pull out of Donetsk Oblast for peace.
Mm-hmm.
Those people in there are going to be interned, interrogated, systematically tortured. You're then going to, every fighting age male is going to be recruited into the Russian army to then fight, get ready to fight the Ukrainians, their own country. Without a choice, but just because J.D. Vance says it's a few kilometers, and then on top of that, those people that are then forced to fight against the country they were living in have lost pretty much any rights unless they do that. Basic
Right.
human rights, basic. They will have to take a Russian passport whether they like it or not. I mean, it just doesn't stop. I mean, this is a country that's put in Nazi-style filtration camps in the East Ukraine.
Correct.
I know because I've been in one.
That's
So,
right.
and then
We're
we get to
actually
my wife's.
we are
Sorry.
now within 2 days, right, of the 4-year mark of your capture, right? Wasn't it the 12th?
Yeah. 13th. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
13th. So that'd
Actually,
be
in
Monday.
about
Fuck, man.
3 days, I was captured. Yeah. I was getting ready to go, actually, about 4 days. We were actually given a nod. It took us 2 attempts to get out. So when we went out on the 11th of April, it was foggy and it was perfect time to go. But there was a Russian BMPs actually on the road we were looking to get out on, so we couldn't go. So we went back the next and had to do another, reinsert ourselves into the positions that we'd
Right.
formerly left, not knowing whether there were Russians there. Once we'd got in and realised they hadn't spotted us, that we'd actually left, then took up the positions we formerly held for another 24 hours, where I was just sitting there going, I just want to get out. I just want to get out. I just want to be the master of my own destiny. I just want to get out of
Right.
this shit.
Right.
So I was just sitting for the next 24 hours. Was the most, I can't think, was probably the worst 24 hours of my life. Ticking over, waiting for 12 o'clock the next night to think maybe we could try and break out of here. But there was drones coming in and people still getting injured and killed on that day. And it was about just 24 hours of getting through that 24 hours to then say, right, I'm now getting out of here. I'm the
Right.
master. Command and control's gone down. That's it. We're off. So that's where we were this time, 4 years ago.
And you just mentioned, like, this is why I keep putting my boots up here on my little step stool. That's Sloviansk clay from the ground from just a week and a half ago, 2 weeks, well, now 2 weeks ago. And that's Donetsk territory on my boots. The area I was just standing in would be turned over to the Russians under this ridiculous idea. And you make a really good point of saying, you mean you really want to tell human beings that are not under occupation, hey, Donald Trump wants to go home and take a nap now, so you're going to be Russian now, or you have to give up everything you love, etc.
Exactly.
I
It's not going
mean,
to happen.
no,
I don't think
what I said
Zelensky is in a
before is
position
I
to.
would drag Witkoff and these fuckers out here to say, no, you tell them.
Yeah,
You tell them.
absolutely.
I'm going to sit over here and I'm going to film you telling that person right there. No, we got your translator. We brought a translator because we want you to tell them that they're going to go live in occupation.
My wife's lost 2 houses to this. She lost family still in Crimea, trapped there. She moved to Mariupol when they invaded Crimea. So Russia's imperialism isn't going to stop. We've been down this road before. So even if you did give up Donbass, they would come again. 3, 5 years later, they'd reorg. This is what they do. They wait and then they come again. So
Right.
my wife is a real history in the fact that she left Crimea to go to Mariupol, and now has had to leave Mariupol to come to Dnipro because she's lost that house. And that's in the space of,
Yeah.
2014, Russia invaded Crimea.
Yeah.
So, in this sort of 10 years, 10 or 11 years, Russia has inched forward. It's not going to stop, even if you give up the strategic belt in Donbass. Zelensky knows
Right.
it. Ukraine know this. We know it. that's where in this present week, which we'll come on to in a bit,
Sure, sure.
where Vance has pretty much said it's just haggling over territory. It's not haggling over territory. My wife's lost 2 homes. This is about they've destroyed our community, killed our friends. They've killed so many people. We can't back down. Zelensky knows that.
Due to personal security for people I will not name, I have a list of at least 15 people that I can tell you off the top of my head right now, if not for personal security of their lives, who are in occupied territory, hoping at some point to be reunited with people later.
I was hoping. I was
Yeah,
in an,
yeah,
an enclosed, I was encircled with 200 kilometers deep. I was
that's
hoping
correct.
somebody was going to get us out. Those guys are still hoping that
Yeah,
people are going to come in and liberate them.
that's right.
And it just doesn't stop because we talk about the partisans, we talk about the offensive capabilities that are going on there now that doesn't reach the Western news so much.
Right,
There are some good podcasts talking about the resistance that's going on there. It doesn't end. Just occupation doesn't mean the war stops. It just means
correct.
it carries on in another form. So there's lots of resistance going on over there at the moment. And this is where Russia's really
But this would be
struggling.
cutting their throat. You make a great point. This would be cutting their throat to basically say, hey, because a guy in Washington, D.C., who is syphilitic, senile, and his minions want to go do something else, we're just going to slit your throat.
Yeah, I mean, he's selling everybody out. And this is not like when he says they're haggling over a small amount of territory. It's not. You're talking 6 million forced, internally displaced refugees that Russia has just bombed their house. We've got people living in our house. We can
That's
see it on
the,
Google Earth. We
thank you
can
for
watch
pointing
it
that out.
every
Right.
time they, re-update the footage on Google Earth. We can see the cars, the people, the around our house and around what's been repaired and what's not. And what you can see is around our house, it's just decimated still. So bomb craters, derelict buildings, with a few people living in around by a school. I mean, it's just we can see that
So when
on
you
the
saw that
Google
video this
images.
week, that I know that hit you pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah, that hit us both pretty hard. The Russians are gloating about stealing houses off the Ukrainians,
Hmm.
and that's where we're at. Even if they wanted a ceasefire, it's not going to end. There's too
Hmm.
much war crimes, Russia's war crimes. There's too much. We talk about Iran and Trump's balls up of the Iran attacks and where he's got to. He's just born a new generation of terrorists because of what he's done in Iran. He's
Hmm.
bombed a school, killed 160 kids. This
Hmm.
isn't going to end in the next 10 years. Anybody thinking this is just going to stop because J.D. Vance is now going to go and do some negotiation. He has no diplomatic experience. You've got a backroom staff that's probably going with him that's probably third or fourth rate because
Right.
he's the vice president who's got no diplomatic skills. You
Exactly. And I put this in my
transfer that
articles.
to Ukraine. It's
Yeah.
exactly the same, but we're not the terrorists. We're they've given birth. Russia's given birth
That's it.
to a
Exactly.
new generation of hatred,
Right.
and that's not just in Ukraine. That's across Europe.
And I was gonna say, so my personal therapy is to write. You and I, God bless, we get on the phone throughout the day for our friends who don't know. We get on the phone, go, "What you writing about? What you doing?
What you
You
doing?
know,
What you?
what you doing? What you up to? You know."
Yeah.
And one of the things I do is I try to see who's all in play around Trump with this, and I was thinking about how Witkoff was, the news was showing that Witkoff was trying to do these negotiations with Iran. And how can you do that when you have a syphilitic, criminal felon, senile guy who just literally says something that I've never been at that level of negotiation in any way, shape, or form. But as a person who throughout my 20s was a manager and has had like, go sit in an office with a handful of people who determine the outcome of many other people. Like in my early 20s I had 12 stores under me, so I had a lot of people that I had to look after. And those little meetings, the last thing I'd want to be doing is sitting in there having a briefing with people and finding out that the people who just told me to go have briefing A suddenly just put out a press release that said, "I will end civilization." Why did you say that? I was getting somewhere. Okay, I guess I'm not getting anywhere.
The reason they're in this situation is so similar to Ukraine. They want a quick fix. So
They
what
want a
they've
quick
done is,
fix.
we've won the war. They haven't. They still are in the straits. They're still commanding the situation. You've not won anything. They've
Now
got
there's
a
going to be
very poor
tariffs. There
hand,
were
the
not
Iranians.
tariffs.
Let me
Remember the
make this
tariffs
clear.
of February 27th in the Strait of Hormuz? The tariffs people had to pay, the $1,000,000-something tariff. No, they didn't exist.
I'm not a regime fan, but I'm going to say
Right.
this. One, they've got a very weak hand and they're playing it very, very well. And
Yes.
they know
got
that they can.
Legos.
Oh, they're holding the straits up because they know they can cripple the world and the economy, and everything's global now. So they're playing an extremely good hand very well. They've
They're
got
playing
Trump
Legos
by the
perfectly. Have you noticed that?
balls.
Wouldn't you agree with that? They're playing Legos perfectly. Have you seen?
They are. I've seen those. I've
Do you
seen
see the
those
one from
videos.
today? The rapper?
Yeah. I do.
Holy
Their
shit.
PR is pretty. I mean, they're sort of like down here or up there. There's like no
I am not
middle.
supposed to. I'm not supposed to appreciate the propaganda of the enemy, because the Iranian regime, not the people per se, but the Iranian
No, I
regime
do.
definitely
I
might enter.
do.
But when
I
I
do.
see it,
I
I'm
mean,
like, oh, masterful.
I was on a. They replaced my head when I was talking. They put me on a Russian propaganda Telegram channel, and
Oh yeah.
they somehow they got a video of me doing one of my talks, but instead they put a frog's head on my fat on my body and started to.
Wow.
The toad tells tall tales is what it said, and I chuckled at that. You know, I was like, God,
Yeah.
that's somebody spent time putting that together. You know, it's like that's quite funny. You know, but I know I laugh at sometimes the propaganda because I mean it understands. First of all, you understand the confidence of your enemy. That if they can put together something like that, they understand you better than you probably understand them, which is slightly worrying
Exactly. That's
because
a very important word.
the Trump administration doesn't understand the IRGC. It doesn't understand Iran. Yet they can pump out a meme which tells everybody us and that they understand us better than we understand
And
them.
I really broke down the frames of the one that came out today with this kind of rapper. It sounded like a Suno rap, by the way. The lyrics weren't great, but they hit every button. You had the ICE raids, you had black men tackled by police, and the racism of
Mm.
America. You had all these little nuances of things that were exactly, pumping up the Epstein files. They didn't put Melania out on a press conference like happened yesterday, which is its own topic. But
That's just, I was like, what? You know, I
I
put
came
on
out
set.
here not because I am trying to speak of myself. No one told me to say anything and distract from what Donald has messed up in the house, but I am here to tell you I have nothing to do with Epstein, and that wasn't in there.
I was pretty sure that he's fucked
That's my
up
worst
Iran
robot
so
impression of all
bad.
week.
He's fucked up Iran so bad. He actually wants to get back to the Epstein files. That's what I put on today.
That's exactly it. He messed up the first distraction so bad he had to go to the second distraction.
Go back to Epstein files, which is just like,
Fine, I'm a pedophile.
Because that's not working, I'm going to flick to NATO.
Oh my God.
That's how Trump's going at the
Is he
moment.
going to get
It's just
so
like,
bad at this case with fighting, he's just going to go out and admit all the things he did just to get out of the other one?
yeah, I mean, if you have to go back to the Epstein files, then bloody hell, yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, that's just disastrous, the way that's going at the moment.
This
But
will be
I
my
mean,
therapy. Tomorrow, if I wake up stressed, I'll just go in the mirror and go, "You're not in his boat." Oh, that's right. I'm in my apartment. Everything's kind of okay.
yeah. And then that was my biggest article this week hit 8,500 reads. I can't believe it. And that was to do with the fact, and basically it's what you just said. It was about, well, it ain't that bad. If you go back to before just where Trump was inaugurated, we were wondering whether we were going to have a summer because he was holding back the artillery shells. You know,
Right.
we were using smoke to hit people, and it was really bad on the front lines. We were like, I was saying to Larissa, I think we're going to have to go. I think we're going to have to move out. This is really bad. To now where we're advising the Middle East inside sort of a year and a half, advising in the Middle East how to best deal with Iran. and now we're not so 60-70% of the weapons that are fighting Russia are built inside Ukraine. We're not in that
Correct.
same place. So when I wrote this week, it spiked. Somewhere it spiked, and it hit 8,500 reads. And I was like, holy shit. But then suddenly I was like 20 on the political scale of Substack going, holy fuck. People are reading my shit.
Yeah.
So it isn't as bad as it was. And that's where mainstream media is really still now so focused on Iran. It's not
Well,
even.
another thing mainstream media is doing that I have no interest in playing along with is, and it's just really maddening to me, is they have become stenographers instead of actual journalists who dig under things. They repeat that, well, Orban did this and Vance did that. They don't get underneath. I mean,
No.
in print, there are some who will. But when it comes to the CNN talking points and their related social media, they are clearly missing how to get underneath that headline they just broadcast. I mean, like real failure to the viewers and the citizens who need to know these additional factors instead of merely repeating that a meeting is taking place. It should be like JD Vance is currently meeting with Viktor Orban, the same Viktor Orban who just gave assurances to Iran that they're on board with them, and et cetera, et cetera. And like for every supposed journalist or reporter, this is why I make a distinction between reporters and journalists, is that, you should be that one who has that instinct to say, did I just stenographer my way through that? Or did I hear the announcement and wait, what's two layers underneath it? And then that's what comes out of your mouth, because that is the distinct difference that is needed right now. Is, for instance, when this week when some of this noise was flying, I wrote Zelensky deals Russia couldn't stop. How Ukraine turned 4 years of prisoner diplomacy, Iranian drones, and the war Moscow started into a Gulf defense empire with 10 security agreements. Now, because you're here, my good brother, how do you feel about Saudi Arabia's assistance with Ukraine? The
Well,
only
to be
person I could ever
honest,
bring on that will give you the best answer of all of them.
I'm a bit. I have no complaints with Saudi Arabia at the moment because they were part of brokering my release, which
Amen.
with Roman Abramovich, which I'm still opinionated about that.
Sure.
Which everyone tells me that he's a really bad man. He's friend with Putin. I said, hold on a minute, he got me home.
He got you home.
Yeah, and I'd sit there and say, there's plenty of rich people. Whatever his motivations for
That's right.
getting involved and getting us home and doing that exchange, there are plenty of rich people like
Right.
Trump who are only interested in themselves. Now,
Right.
whatever his motivations for, he went out on a limb and got 150 Ukrainians home, 55 Russians home,
Right.
and sat down and took the time to talk to us. Whatever his background, whatever he did, there's 150 Ukrainians now home with their families because Roman Abramovich got involved. So I'm at the point where I sit and say, you can't always deal with just people you like. I come from the business world. I come from set up my own business, did quite well. And if I only dealt with people I liked, I'd never have any business. So you have to understand that you
Right.
can't, and same with politics. You have to, and diplomats and politicians, they have to deal with people they don't like. But there's a some sort of honor in that. You don't go against your own. You don't do what the Trump administration is doing. Is openly, you're so bad at negotiating that you don't put pressure on the actual aggressor. You actually, literally, you put pressure on the side that's been invaded, and
Right.
you go against morality. This is the home of the free, the land of the brave.
Right.
Where has that been in the last, diplomatic talks were involving Russia and Ukraine? It's always been
Right.
push
Exactly.
Ukraine, push Ukraine, Ukraine, push Ukraine. And now that, Vance has been on Hungarian TV talking about, this is just haggling over kilometers. This is now pushed us into an area where it's now Russia, the USA, and Hungary fight in Europe.
Right.
And that's where we're at. That's where we're at. And China's just sitting down there watching all this unfold, thinking, Trump's done a great job, because the one thing that Putin would want as a Christmas present would be to disable his main adversary, which is NATO, and Trump's helping him do it.
That's right. I'm looking at our what we've achieved in the last week. You and I talk every Friday, and in the last week, it's astounding the amount of news that has broken, and then thus creates a lot of articles. So this week, I put out a few articles on this, but there was two articles in particular, to because we have on Sunday will be the elections in Hungary, and there are two articles, and it's actually there are five, no, there may be six articles on this topic in general about Slovakia and Hungary, but I really started burrowing into some of this because when you and I were on the phone earlier this week, I'm like, but we need to really get to why do you love Hungary so much? Why there? Why not like Giorgia Meloni, Italy, or yeah, like Poland has a pretty hard right wing side it's more right wing than your Ukraine is right now, and it's because those countries are not friendly to Russia. They are also willing to fight corruption. If you look at the Transparency Corruption Index, the countries that I would label as a bit right wing in Europe or have other reasons to be favorable to the MAGA brand, meaning they have things going on there, they're very MAGA friendly. They also are not interested in participating in the Russian corruption that you clearly see with Yanukovych. I mean, I see Yanukovych.
Yeah, it's
Convergence actor. That's what
well,
I
we
was
talked
defining
about
when you were getting on was convergence actor, which is the
while
term I
you're
use
on
for.
that.
Yeah.
Why is it you never ever hear a Ukrainian say, "Bring back Yanukovych"?
Yeah, yeah. I
And
mean,
we live
it's
here.
doesn't get said. And I have some people who
Doesn't
absolutely
get said.
despise, the Zelensky, but they're like, I want Zelensky,
Yeah,
you know,
or the
right.
other one.
Yeah.
It's like,
But I basically like I went through two articles why do they love Hungary, and I had one before our show last week. It's almost 2 weeks old. I wrote how CPAC has blood on its hands by really pouring their MAGA futures into Hungary. But the one that I put out yesterday, called "Lost in Budapest," the Vice President of the United States just campaigned for the Kremlin's best asset in Europe. I took all three of the transcripts of those of the seventh and the eighth, where he was on the big stadium thing where Donald didn't answer the phone twice and then finally did. He had another speech after that, and then he had an interview, and it was a combined about almost an hour and a half of transcripts. And one of the things I do with those transcripts is I digitize them so I can break them faster down into talking points. Get like what you do is you strip away the narrative and you just
mm,
you say like because I have a clean transcript. That's fine. That's document one. Document two is you start getting into the bullet point side and remove some of the chatter in betweens, and then anything that's repeated in each of the three, right? So then you start saying, what did he actually just say? Now, while I'm doing that, I'm watching JD Vance doing this after I got the list done. Then I watch him because I want to watch his visual cues. How does he say some of the things that he says, right? And watching also during this, it hit a button when he said, and also he had the text out there that says, "The God of our fathers." In other words,
oh,
the specific kind of Christianity he wants to brand, and that's when it included me. That's actually how the articles get. I try to tell our viewers how the articles get germinated out of my weird brain. It'd be that one phrase. He goes, "That's the article right there." Why?
mm.
Because Peter Magyar is not a lefty woke guy. He is a center right member of the party that Orban. I almost just said Yanukovych again, even though I have Orban's picture right in front of me here. But he has a center right position. It is a Christian, overlay on that, a conservative Christian overlay, and so there is no woke battle going on in this. So it's all bullshit, right? Now here in Ukraine, wokeism doesn't occur here. Maybe you find like one or two people here, someone blue hair or something, but it's not the predominant thing. It's a very
No.
Christian country. That's another thing I put in there.
Traditional, conservative.
Very traditional conservative. And also one of the things I weaved into Lost of Budapest is that he used these things about returning to Western values. Taliban
Mm.
Talibangelicals. I love this Talibangelicals. That's almost as good as our vanilla vanilla ISIS. Some of those things. Al Qaeda.
Vanilla ISIS.
We
I
have
love
some
it.
good terms for this. But I said, for all these
Televangelicals.
ideas that they spew in their talking points, if I abstract where he's at, I'm like, but we have that right here. The purpose of
Yeah.
Euromaidan was to push to a Western alliance. Like they called this whole panel that they did the Hungarian American Friendship, event.
Yeah, but you
And
know what he doesn't have here?
yeah,
You know what he does? You know what Vance doesn't
go
have here?
yeah,
His commercial ad revenues.
right. But
He's,
here's
he's an
another thing is
investor in Rumble, and
yeah,
Rumble is a platform that platforms Russian state TV,
absolutely they
RT,
do.
Russia
Absolutely
Today.
do they. Yeah.
He doesn't have that, so he's not gonna say anything other
But
than
there's something in this that you're on it. You're on the same
comes
topic
from the
I want
money.
to address is
The
that
dengue, brother. It's the dengue.
it
It's
is.
all to do with the
Well,
dengue.
Orban owns 80% or has controlled 80% of the media in Hungary. So what happened yesterday? What you did not see is any opposition press voice that says, "Well, real quick, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President Vance, you had none of that because the entire thing was scripted. It was scripted at a nation state level."
It is.
Okay, and that was a big thing that I didn't see. CNN, BBC, any of those outlets when they were talking about these visits, not one of them stopped and said, "Have you stopped to recognize that this entire thing that just transpired was entirely scripted? Like every part of it perfectly crafted." And this is exactly what it's all about with Orban and the Kremlin.
I don't think it's resonated too well with the Hungarians. I think they're now sitting there saying we're not Hungarian. We're caught between if we vote for Orban, we're caught between an American administration that's pretty much so trying to push on Orban in his dismal election polling. And now what you're looking at is that this week Michael Weiss has just broken a story which is the transcripts of their foreign minister actively giving European
The
lifetime
documents, right?
commentary and documents to the Russians and doing their bidding,
Right.
which means that basically Hungary isn't Hungary; it's a Russian vassal state, which I don't think has resonated too well with the
Yeah, that's in my
Hungarians.
article when he said he used a parable of the Aesop's parable of the mouse that pulls the thorn from the lion,
Yeah.
and how do you in one breath say we are all for our sovereign independence and no one will tell us how to be unless it's the Kremlin?
And the Kremlin's they've just been exposed this week, and I think that's had a massive impact on. I
Right.
mean, I think it was like 70% now the opposition.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to take into consideration 16 years. At some point, people are going to want to change.
Right.
But I
Exactly.
think I think this is pretty bad. And why he sent Vance was because Trump didn't want to be actively, pushing. If Orban loses, it's Vance, not Trump. That's orchestrated in this. You got to remember, it was exactly a year ago he went to visit the Pope. And then about a
Right.
few days later, he fucking died. So it's a pretty good omen that he's gone to visit Orban at Easter when he visited the Pope the year before. It's like somebody reminded him, said, he went to see the Pope the year before, and then he died straight after his visit. So, it's pretty good omen that Vance has gone to Hungary just before the election because he's probably given him his death now,
That's right.
which is great.
Now, I have not put out this article. I'm going to mention it because we're passing it for half a moment. I have not put out this article. I've worked on it for a few days, partially because I don't know what I'm going to say that wasn't in the other data that's out there, and that means I usually don't want to really finish an article on something. But the idea that the Pentagon under Elbridge Colby um, brought in the delegate
It's
Vatican
like
delegation and said,
it's
"Really,
like we
let me tell you
rehearsed
how
this.
powerful our military is," and went back to the Avignon, papacy, and reminded him how they took over, and power tripped their way to remove the Pope years ago. And I went, "Really? It's going to be you versus the Pope?" Who happens to be, let me remind everyone, an American who understands American mindset along with the
Yeah, yeah,
Bible.
it's like we talked about this. We didn't actually. We never talked about this. It's like we rehearsed it. No, the stories this week are just horrendously. It's piecing together everything. If you look at everything individually, is what I keep telling people. There's normally a way out of it and a good reasoning. But if you step back and look at what's happened, everything since Trump's inauguration, now
Hmm.
you've got to the point where people are picking sides. It's over. There's now transcripts being released. There's now, people are siding with people. So the
That's right.
scenario I tell people is, listen, if we lose and Orban gets in on Sunday, nobody in Europe or the world understands how important this election is. And you've got to remember, in World War One started in Hungary.
Right.
It's like, it is the melting pot of where everything sort of starts. I mean, it was, it's it's for Russian occupation, but now somehow manifested it's going back to it, which I don't think is sitting quite nicely with. I went to Hungary, I went to Budapest, and I made a point of asking who supports Orban. I couldn't find anybody, and bearing in mind I was only in cities, I couldn't find one person that supported Orban in the cities. But I'm
Right.
told, and I'm loosely told, someone better at this than me could probably correct me if I'm wrong. But a lot of the support that comes from Auburn is not in the cities now. It's from those rural areas. It's from the outskirts. It's from
Yeah.
those places he can draft, manipulate, bring in, where he can pump out, similar to Russia, that propaganda state TV, where the cities are not. They're more astute. They're more open to other views. Universities are obviously there, and places like that. So slightly different, but he's absolutely simulating how Russia stirs its masses. So, but that was my view on a quick trip to Budapest. I thought it was a beautiful city. It's an amazing city,
Hmm.
and to spend New Year's there was one of the best New Years I've ever been to. It's absolutely amazing. And I strongly recommend people don't be put off by Orban. Go to Budapest and see it. It's an
Yeah.
absolutely beautiful city. Culture, food, everything. And I love Bogric. Is my favourite Carpathian dish, which is a Hungarian stew,
Hmm.
sort of Carpathian Ukrainian Hungarian stew, which is an amazing dish. But yeah, I strongly people to go there and make your own mind. It is a beautiful beautiful city, a beautiful country.
What do you think about the fact that, let's pivot to this, is that Zelensky's been a little bit more aggressive with his takedowns of Vance? And, I don't know about you. I wouldn't be taking Kremlin advice either. These comments that are, really,
He
and he
is.
seems to
He
know where
is.
the audience is right now. The world audience is still in his court.
I think he's very good. I think with Hungary he made a bit of a cock up there. I think he played to Orban. Now Orban and Fico are complaining, and the first
Hmm.
thing that they told Vance when he came over is that Zelensky threatened to send people over to Orban, which I was like, hold on a minute, mate, you started this. You've just been pushing this and pushing this, and I think Zelensky didn't see that coming too well, and I think he probably said something that could be misconstrued. But this is a Hungarian government that have banned Magar, the drone guy in Ukraine, who have stopped a native Hungarian who's fighting for Ukraine,
Yeah,
who's
Robert.
the Robert
Yeah, yeah, I know him.
Magar,
Yeah,
who's the drone guy who they've banned him from coming back into Ukraine, into Hungary, and they've just stolen 80 million in gold bullion and dollar, money from the Ukrainians. So this
right.
isn't they didn't mention that advance.
Right. Right.
It was like staged. It was so staged. They didn't mention all this, that they've just ransomed him and said, well, you get the pipeline up and running, we'll give you that 80 million back.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's such stage managed bullshit by Orban. Felt propaganda-y, very Russian. I don't think having been to Budapest, and I don't think anybody in the cities are really believe in that. And if you watch the news today, he was booed off the stage, and they're
Hmm.
expecting the 70% the opposition are going to get. And then you got to remember, Hungary's going through its own problems with paedophilic scandals and problem with schools, and they're going through their own Epstein at the moment. And Orban's linked to that. So I
Right.
think it will go in our favour. I'll be absolutely shocked if it doesn't, considering all the polls are saying that Orban's just dropped off the grid. So I can't see anything changing there. I think it will be a win. And if we can get the midterms,
Yeah.
where Trump's lost the midterms considerably, he's going to lose the Senate and Congress. Then he's going to be a redundant president for 2 years. You can speak more about it than me. I'm not going to talk American politics. I'm not really that great on
Yeah.
it. But essentially, he's going to be a redundant president for 2 years, and nobody's going to get Democrats to get it. The following 2 years. So, I honestly think more doors are going to shut if we win. This election in Hungary. If we win that, we win it. I'm not Hungarian, but this
Yeah.
is how
Well,
how
one
I
of
would
one
work.
of the you and I pay attention to what happens with these videos when we're done. It creates little shorts out of our commentary, pops them up to YouTube, and then we get additional comments that show up on the chatter over on YouTube or maybe even here, right? So some stuff that we don't talk about here, our viewers say during the week. And one person who from Australia who saw a clip when I said that the left in America, and I don't like the word left and right, but because MAGA is extreme right, everyone but MAGA. So my the counter force is actually how I also said it in the same video is not serious. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? It's not to say that there aren't serious people in there. It's not to say that people in that aren't wanting a change. It's that the actions are not reflecting the type of outcome that they're desiring in the verbiage. Now, my my juxtaposition to come to that conclusion is that no kings, although good, and I'm very glad people are doing those actions. It's sparse. It's only here and there. It's planned. I don't know when the next one even is, but here from November 2013 until February 2014, into late around the 22nd of February 22nd when Yanukovych fled. No one went home. There wasn't like, oh, in a couple of weeks we'll do it again. No, it was nonstop. And the person that was responding back and forth with me started saying, well, we got to get rid of Schumer and Jeffries. And I said, all of this is the wrong approach. He says, what are you saying? 2A, Second Amendment? Same thing. Wrong mentality. In other words, it means you don't understand what I'm saying about revolution. Revolution is not about what gun you carry. Okay. That is a tool. Revolution happens here. The whole point of Gil Scott's Heron's song, the revolution will not be televised, is that it's not something that happens on your television. It happens here. It happens here. Okay.
Yeah.
And that is what's not quite happening. There's this wishful desire. So if you're like, if we have Americans watching right now, this is a message for you guys. And it's true for other locations. It's just that it's not happening. Maybe if you're in Hungary, the message is also for you. But in America, the revolution has to happen here. Okay. Um, and if you're already in that mindset, great, but your neighbor isn't, okay? Your colleagues are not. They're hoping someone comes along, the next magic Obama, the Governor Newsom, someone like that, that there's this desire, some perfect person comes along, this better politician. No, it has to be you. The people who met in Euromaidan for those months in 2014, 2013 into 2014 were normal people. I've met Mustafa Nayem, who was a journalist who basically started all of that. He put a post on Facebook in November 2013 and said, we're going to go meet here. There was no plan. There was no, despite, you saw my article I posted yesterday about how to
Yeah.
lie about Ukraine, the Ukrainian war with
Sean
Sean
Ryan's a
Ryan.
dick.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
an absolute
So
penis.
all of that means that none of these two guys that were in that video on YouTube talking about how this all happened, quoting Victoria Nuland something, never met a Ukrainian who was part of the actual Euromaidan movement and the Revolution of Dignity. And to really understand what happened with the Revolution of Dignity, you have to understand that internal revolution that takes place where the bullshit is over. And we're not going home until this motherfucker goes away. Okay, so we don't have that in America yet. We have a hope that Rachel Maddow says something great on television, a hope that CNN will cover the breaking news that it's over, a hope that some process of 25th Amendment will take him down, a hope that, no, that means everyone's at home,
No.
everyone's normally at work still, everyone's driving in traffic still, and the corruption is continuing. Okay, now, what do I suggest? When people say like the nonstop strikes and all these different other things, now we're talking, okay, action that shuts the shit down,
Mm.
okay, and shuts it down, not in a violent way, like when someone is, that in that YouTube post says, "Do you mean 2A?" I do not own a gun. I have not owned a gun since, I bought one because my father-in-law, who just passed away Sunday, God bless my late father-in-law. Um, I didn't want one in my life because I don't like the mindset it creates for someone like me. You quickly turn to something so deadly. I'd rather use my brain to get through the next process, to get through. And I lived in a gang neighborhood, I could walk out of my gang neighborhood with the same attitude I have right now, like that. Fuck you, we'll put that guy's gun away. Man, don't be pulling that shit at me. And that's something you have to have inside, not something on your hip. Okay. Same thing with the revolution. You have to be inside the change. And one of my favorite, I can't use this word, I don't use the N word, but one of my great heroes is Umar bin Hassan of the Last Poets, who had a song, the N word are scared of revolution. I don't use that word. And he's talking about changes that don't come around when you're still waiting for permission to be who you are. You've got to be way beyond that line, okay? And Americans are not beyond that line, not yet. You know, they're
It's getting
panicked, they're
close.
scared, they're upset, they're furious. Tucker Carlson's going at him.
Yeah.
Marjorie Taylor Greene's going at him. He's attacked the very vocal bark dogs that were in his corner. Now there we're getting somewhere, right? But some of those people, like I don't like Marjorie Taylor Greene worth a damn, okay? But she's got
Nope.
far more revolution in her mind than my allies in America. Okay, she
Yeah.
was willing to finally go up and go, you know what? I've fucking had it with this. And she's as crazy as she was a year ago, I promise you. But something in her has changed just enough where she's going to double down. She's going to stay on that course. She's not going to suddenly pivot back. Megyn Kelly, who I utterly despise, I call her Nazi Barbie. She's in the same boat. They're kind of beginning to smell blood in the water, and they're going there little by
You
little. They're
know,
going there.
do
Go
you know
ahead.
what I said today? I literally said, I'm not American, but I follow American politics and I follow the war in Ukraine, and it's all
Yeah.
incestuously linked. And I try and tell people that this is not individual as much as people want to say it is. It's not
Right.
isolated. It's not isolated here. It's not isolated. Right? It's exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what you've got is that all these people, they're very carefully planning this. And what
Mm-hmm.
Trump will do is massage each one of their egos in about a week or two.
Right.
And those guys would still vote for Trump if he ran for a third term. I just
There
don't
are.
believe
Yeah. Yeah.
anything that MTG says. I don't believe anything that Tim Pool says. I don't believe anything that
Right.
MAGA says. Because what they do is it's part of this orchestrated resistance that, like, similar to Putin. Trump
Right.
models himself on Putin. He's even got his Margarita Simeon in Laura Loomer. He's
Mm-hmm.
got his, his right-hand man,
Mm-hmm.
and his stupid puppet vice president. And you've got that in Dmitry Medvedev. He's
Yeah. Right.
absolutely textbook. The way that Trump set this up is identical
It
to
really is. Yeah.
how Putin set his system up. and the way he's running it now, it's identical. So
So let
Putin,
me put some
even
Russian terms on that real quick. I'm gonna hand it right back to you, but let me put some Russian terms on it. For over a century, the boyars, the Tsar must do no wrong was always a concept very strong, all the way back to like Peter the Great's father, Alexei Tashaishi. Alexei Tashaishi is a kind of interesting term if you just study Russian history. The quiet noble one. In other words, he's so gentle. No, he wasn't gentle. He was a Tsar. He was a terror. He was a terrorist to the people. But they would blame the underlings. Oh, it wasn't us. And so that the population class would say, oh, the Tsar wouldn't do this to us, but those damn boyars will. And that's what Trump is doing when he uses that clash. You take that bat right back and continue with that. But that's the same model that the Russians use, where it's not Putin.
Right, it's
It's
identical the way
yeah.
he's running things. It is. He's got his Fox News, his propaganda, his RT. You could go all day with this now. Even he can't control the MAGA masses now. But
Mm-hmm.
essentially, in a week or two, he'll just massage Tucker Carlson, the head of the propagandist, and eventually he'll massage them, and they will all be eaten out of his flipping food bowl at some point.
Mm-hmm.
This is all part, and even Putin give room for protest. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he allowed it to go on because it give people a control mechanism to, like a safety valve to vent. So even Putin would control, which was like a safety valve. Yeah, you can do that, but
Right.
that's your safety. You know,
This
that's
is what
how he
I'm saying.
managed
I'm
it.
concerned about no kings. Is not because I never will doubt the sincerity of people organizing it, participating in it, etc. That is not where I'm coming from. But if you don't recognize that you are part of that release valve, okay, then you're going to go, oh, well, we achieved something. Did you get your T-shirt?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. Did you get your T-shirt? Did you get
yeah,
free merch?
yeah,
Did you get your face
yeah,
on Facebook going, yeah,
yeah.
I'm
Is
protesting?
your belly satisfied?
Yeah. No, in Ukraine, when they protest, they take, everything they don't step on the grass, if you remember that
Yep,
thing.
yep,
But
right,
we'll protest. We don't step on the grass if there's a sign saying don't step on the grass, but we'll protest and we'll protest until the point we get shot at and then we go full Maidan. And then it's like battle for, we're going to take it on. You're going to
right.
start killing innocent protesters, then we're going to start taking it on. So that made Shaun Ryan's clip today an episode with some fucking idiot who came on and started talking about,
Yeah,
the real reasons why, Ukraine. Propagandists, that does my head in, propagandists who in America will only bring Americans on to talk about Ukraine, who have
right.
never been to Ukraine,
You
don't
can't
really
come up
talk
with a
about
better
Maidan,
name. You can't
never
come up with a
been
better
to
name as a
fucking
guest than someone who's going to be your guest named Pete Blabber.
Bleep Blabber. I mean, God, who's Pete Blabber? God. But I've
I
tried to
could.
get, I've nearly got on Fox. I've got actively 3 congressmen, 2 senators. I got my friend is Adam Kinzinger, who said CNN will take me on when I come over.
Mhm.
But generally, trying to get on American TV as a Brit, POW, who's interrogated, tortured.
Right.
Can I get on a news feed? Can I get on a podcast? Is anybody interested in me? Are they really want to talk about me living in Ukraine? No. I've
Yeah.
been rejected so many times by American media because they don't want me. They want fucking Mr. Nutjob or
Right.
some guy who's sitting there with his eyes crossed going, yeah, well, the real reason what's happening is because, it's literally, it's like they sit there and they bite and they get Shaun Ryan just got one on going, yeah, well, it's we sit on the couch and then suddenly, it's we all sitting there and all these CIA agents went over to Ukraine and decided, yeah, we're going to topple Russia. It's like fucking that. It just does my absolute nutted.
And he
And we,
said, and in the transcript, one of the ways I come up with my articles, and I had you on the phone earlier, I showed you, is I basically take that video. I found it on Twitter. It was 17 minutes or so, and I took the video down and I upload it to YouTube so I get my own transcript. I clean out the transcript and then I just basically piece right back through it. Go, okay, and I break it down like I said earlier about JD Vance. And he says, well, I can tell you what happened back then. For instance, I just went and looked it up again for the video. I'm like, the video, yeah. Do you know how I get my information about Euromaidan? I get on the phone with the people who were involved in it.
involved in it. Yeah,
For
well,
fuck's sake, you
shocker.
know? Right.
Absolute
I actually
fucking
could go
brainless
down
shocker.
the street where it occurred and talk to the people. I could do this. In fact, I'm going to be working on a plan to do exactly this, where I'm going to go stand in Maidan's Nezhnye and maybe even at St. Michael's where some things happen, and get some people who are involved. And go, let's actually talk about what happened right fucking here.
Yeah, with
When did
shocker.
Victoria Nuland give you cookies?
And you got,
Where were the
Shaun
cookies
Meyer
passed out?
just went down the pub in Springfield and grabbed some fucking idiot out of the pub and just went,
Right,
do
right.
you fancy going on a podcast? Do
Yeah.
you know anything about Ukraine? And he's like, funny you should say that. Buy me another whiskey and I'll talk about Ukraine all day long.
Right, right, right.
Oh no, my
Oh my
camera's just
God.
dropping in.
It's a terrible
Honestly.
thing, these stands. Um,
Yeah, my stand's
so,
gone, sorry.
one thing I'll stick to that, or pivot around that is that Russia's losing when it has to run back to disinformation, and you know that the
Yeah.
allies of that discussion start running back when they run out and start have to run to disinformation. Things like Luhansk has been fully captured. No, it has
Oh
not.
well, yeah. I mean,
It
it's
was
that's a
already a lot of it
given.
was already under occupation anyway, so it wasn't like there's but no, it's not. And you wouldn't need Witkoff trying to hand over territory if these things were true. It would be just hey, we already won. Putin is now you know 12 into the 13th year of an attempted invasion and into the 5th year of full scale. And let's pivot to the thing I know you've been paying attention to. How's the mobilization going on the Russian side? We'll come back to the Ukrainian side in a minute, but
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. I mean, it is a real difficult one.
yeah,
Essentially, for the last 4 months, according to Fedorov, Ukraine has been really uh, creating more casualties than they can actually recruit, which is great, and that's been going on for some time.
right,
However, they're still offering now with the what Trump's done in Iran and the bonuses. Suddenly, the bonuses are back in, and suddenly we're looking at paying more people, which either says, Russia's got some financing, someone's paying for it, maybe China, I don't know. But essentially, there's a huge deficit. The federal budget, there's a big deficit that's now not going to really even the benefits that Russia's making with the high oil prices
right,
and the sanctions relief that Trump's given them, it's not really going to benefit Russia really because Ukraine's doing so much damage to the recycling parts and the infrastructure in Russia. So it's not going to have that much of an impact. So essentially, Russia's getting some funding somewhere to really to be able to keep going on, but the oligarchs rule Russia. Apparently, he's down below a 30%, below 30% approval rating. He's plummeting. You've seen, with the cutting of Western social media platforms like TikTok and Telegram. Telegram's the number one, as we said in the last episode, is the number one app used not just in Ukraine but in Russia too. So to cut that means that the military can't use, and that's
right,
exposed them because they don't have a communication system other than Starlink, which is Western, which they've been trying to say that they're self-reliant and they don't need the West to actually be shown to be using Western tech is deeply
right.
embarrassing for the Kremlin. So they don't have a backup plan. They're trying to push Mac through that's failing, which is their own brand. And people are still using VPN, which Russia's trying to shut down. So,
Right.
Anybody pushing a Russian agenda is essentially using a VPN to get out of. So, your Kirill Dmitrievs and your Medvedevs who are pushing this Russian agenda are actually using a VPN to get out on Twitter because it's banned.
Exactly. Exactly.
So you have to sit there and but the trouble is to your average American or your average guy who's nothing to do with this war, who's just sitting on the other side of the planet, they don't know any of this stuff until the likes of me and you get on a podcast and start illuminating it to people, and talking to people about what it's like on the ground and what Russian propaganda is. I got Brahim text me the other day, and we were having a laugh and catching up, and he's stuck in Morocco, telling me that he's got an RT sign outside his fucking house.
Wow, really?
And these are the guys he was pushed in front of and interrogated by, and without a choice. And these are the the agents of the Kremlin. These are the guys that are, pushing, justifying the war and setting tomorrow's narrative, Russia Today. So, it's like he has to deal with that every day in Morocco, which Africa is where they're trying to push. So,
right.
It is
actually. Let me capitalize on that for a minute. So one of the things that happened this week was that some friends pointed out to me that Russians with Attitude were on this platform, and there were other parts of why they popped up on my
I've
timeline to bring
seen
them up.
that. Yeah, they were just
And Kyiv Independent outed the two, basically the two lead guys who were running it, and in doing so, Kirill Ilyich Kamenetsky, who is based in Germany right now, and Nikolai,
shocker.
who's the pseudonym is his real name is Eldar Faridovich Orlov. And the fact that he's got a Turkic surname was also someone that pointed that out, Faridovich, and he's from Yekaterinburg. And these two guys have been very active on Telegram for years. I've been on their monitoring their Telegram for many years, and very busy on
Use the
Twitter,
phone, Mike.
right, or X. And now they're actually on Substack, which is why your camera is falling apart. So,
yeah, fucking Russians.
but
Yeah.
the reason why I decided to write an article about them this week called "The Russian Podcast." Don't scroll. Okay, the Russian podcast that pays for the war: How Russians Turned a Western podcast audience into a Russian military fundraising operation, is that they had their Patreon account killed after the exposure from the Kyiv Independent and TUA research exposure, because that's not what they wanted. Patreon doesn't want it having to do with it. This platform is also platforming them. And someone asked me earlier this week, because I said, hey, why is Substack, platforming terrorists? And it's not because, and someone said, kind of maybe cynically, like, well, because they don't care about the effect. I'm not going to go there with that. I'm not going to say that the owners of this platform um, are into that mindset. They do have a very strong, like, free speech agenda on Substack. However, it takes viewers to recognize that this group, Russians with Attitude, RWA, are on here. Mike Flynn and others are on here. Mike Flynn, unless he's out saying more revolution and raise money for terrorism, he's going to be expressing his views. You just have to beat him with better views, which we can do. But the other ones, you've got to look at those posts, and you got to carefully go read those posts and find if they have violated the terms of service of this platform. Report that shit, because they were raising money for helping Russian soldiers kill Ukrainians. And if they do it on this platform, report that shit.
Why are you on that?
So long as we're on disinformation.
I hope you can hear me. I've just changed the mic because the battery's going. But yeah, literally, exactly why I got on the platform was because I think it was Adam saying you've got a story. People are buying into that. Nobody can tell you what happened to you was wrong. And
right.
There's not many people like you who could speak with in the West about what's going on in Ukraine, which inspired me to get on to become a journalist. Which this week I got my British accreditation through. I'm now applying for my Ukrainian accreditations, which means that then I can go and do some serious reporting on the front. But that being said, I know a
camera guy who will go with you.
Okay, yeah, I know, yeah. You're coming with me, but certainly, I literally got into the game because when I'm 52, who's going to employ someone that's been a former prisoner of war in Ukraine? And when they asked me, sort of, so what can you bring to the company? And I'm going to go, well, I can shoot a net, so that's at 300 meters, and it's like, and I've been a prisoner of war. They're not going to take me on. So, literally, war correspondent was probably the only thing I was ever going to go into. So I think it's a good fit. Certainly, while the war's on, I can speak with having been on both sides, having fought in
Hmm.
a war, having been a Ukrainian Marine, having lost my home. I think it gives me a slight edge over someone like Russians with attitude. I don't know them, to be honest. I will certainly
Right.
read their stuff and watch them, but it will give me someone. This war, unfortunately, is probably the first war that's really being fought in people's living rooms, if you know what I mean by that. And that is you've got people like, and I'm going to pull Shaun Ryan off the top of my head because I just did a post about it today, who doesn't set foot outside America, never comes to Ukraine, interviews people about Ukraine, but they're American that have never been to Ukraine.
Right. Right.
And that's the
Also, let's
sort
let's
of
go further
you've
than never
got.
been to. How about an extended period of time where you really learn what Ukraine's about?
Exactly. I mean, the culturally. I mean, I'm not sure Sean Ryan could even talk culturally about the difference between Ukraine and Russia.
Right.
From just probably
In
watching a
fact, in that
transport movie.
broadcast, they literally said things about the Eastern Russian language, something. I was like, oh, really? So my mom, my adopted family, but my mom from Kherson, that if I was not in the house, would be speaking Russian with the family. She speaks only Ukrainian with
Exactly.
me, but she's from
I
Kherson.
was born in
Yeah,
London.
yeah,
I learned Russian
yeah.
first. I'm a Russian speaker from East Ukraine. Just born
Right,
in London. I married
right.
into a Ukrainian family. I've lived here
Exactly.
for years. But I generally my Ukrainian is pretty bad. And it's only since the war where people have said, "Oh, you speak that dog language," but I never had it
Right,
up
right.
until 2022. And still in Dnipro, I don't get it very often. I speak Russian now, and nobody gives me a second look. It's like, and
Yeah,
especially in Dnipro, where I can speak Russian, but they know I'm Briton or foreigner straight away because I still speak Russian with a London accent. It's like
correct.
I can't get away from it's not going to be something I can sort of switch very, very quickly. So,
Well, this is what the
you
driving
know,
will look like now. This is when you go through the nets.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Larissa's showing me the video. She's been through up to Kharkiv and stuff like that quite recently.
this is the road to Izum,
Yeah,
and all
Zoom. Yeah.
throughout the road is covered with nets. So Arcadian has asked, will you help me understand, will both of you take Ukrainian roads and villages to make documentaries? Yeah,
Yeah, that's what we do.
it's my passion. I was
That's what we
documenting
do.
4 years ago today. I was documenting the devastation in Bucha and the 8th, ninth, and 10th, and then also Borodyanka and Makariv. And this is something that I find till the end of my days will be eternally valuable to me personally, because I don't have to, from an epistemological point of view, I don't have to wait for, oh, I saw on CNN or I saw online. No, I saw it in fucking person. I smelled it in fucking person, having charred Russian bodies
Exactly.
fused into the BMPs, going, oh shit, that's a Russian soldier? Yeah, that doesn't even look like a human. It's sort of a mole. What is that? Like,
That's what Sean Ryan is just like way off the grid. Tucker
right,
Carlson, way off the grid. He's got dipshits that
yeah,
absolutely know nothing about what's going on in the world. And the reason why Trump's in the mess he is with Iran, because he surrounds himself by these dipshits
that's right,
who
right,
who 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 don't understand the system. He doesn't want
that's
experts.
right.
He wants loyalists, and that's it. He wants to get rid of the experts, and that's the situation you find yourself in now with Iran, where America's released sanction on. I'm going to keep saying it, Chris,
Go for it,
because
go for it.
you know, he's released sanctions on Russia, which is allowing them to net
Mm-hmm.
billions that then support Iran that kills US servicemen. I
Correct,
can't say it enough times. They've passed on intelligence, they're supplying drones, modified drones into Iran to help them target US servicemen. How do you think they shot down aircraft? How do you think they targeted AWACSs? How do you think they did all that? It wasn't the
correct,
Iranians, it was Russians that supplied them the information. Yeah, Trump's supplying them the money to do that. Why
correct.
this is not on the front page of every fucking newspaper in America, I have no fucking idea. I just don't get it.
Well, and I think on that topic, I think we should say that people like Mehdi Hassan should have to come here and face, for instance, the drone flying over my building. Let's see, is a pause going on? No, you know, that drone
Yeah,
literally
yeah,
almost
yeah.
impacting directly into my apartment while I was live on TV. And I've sent you videos I don't publish online of them passing over the building I'm at now. I mean, I've been here almost a year and just a couple months, and I've had every level of missile fly across us. Zircons, Kinjals, Iskanders, and the number of drones that have flown by is insane. And why do I bring that up? Because Mehdi Hassan, and I had to get this off my chest. You're a Brit. Mehdi Hassan fucked up and said, "Well, Mr. Zelensky, I'm particularly disappointed in you because you may not want to hear this, but Iran is Ukraine now." I'm like, really?
Oh man, that just I think that pissed me off. I don't need to go into that. That
Whoa.
got some serious backlash. We're Iran when you want us to be. Otherwise, you're killing our people, kids,
Yeah.
children,
What is
supplying
the what is
weapons.
the Ukrainian equivalent of the Houthis, the Hezbollah and Hamas
Yeah, yeah,
proxy war?
yeah.
There
I
isn't
saw
one.
that too. I saw that too. That was just a dreadful comment. It's like, hold on a minute, dude. It's like, do you know how many Iranian drones have killed,
Right.
Ukrainians here? It's not quite the same. We're not saying they tried to do it with Palestine as well, and
No.
Israel. I mean, I'm not an expert on that region, to be honest. I don't really get drawn into it. I know I tell people not to really draw the two, as a comparison because people go, "Well, Gaza's fuck, it's genocide." I said, "Dude, as many people are lost in Gaza were lost in Mariupol. No, they weren't just Mariupol. I mean,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
like, don't
If
even
you
go
haven't
down
seen
this,
them,
don't
the
even go down this
satellite
route."
footage of mass graves is enough to tell you what happened in Mariupol.
Yeah, exactly. Don't even go down this route. You're not even on par. So if you're comparing Gaza to Ukraine, we lost as many as you lost in Gaza in just Mariupol, and it's still going
It,
on 4 years
and
later.
and let me highlight, since you're my brother in this topic. We this Like, I will go to the rally this Sunday, and it's gonna be a different kind of emotional rally because it'll be the 4-year mark since many of my friends had their defender captured, and they have not seen them the entire time since then. I have been very blessed to know you and others who have come home, and that's a blessing. But there are still many who, in the exact same units, they do not have all of those guys home. Some of them may never come back because we don't know where they're at. We don't know what happened with their bodies. We had 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers repatriated, the remains repatriated this week, and I have a whole listing that I haven't figured out how to write that article, but I constantly download the coordination headquarters Telegram data to update all of my knowledge on this, and there's always that side that's the repatriation of those who were killed. And so we don't know what has happened to many Ukrainian civilians. We don't know, and I said this about Bucha and Izum being mass graves, is that if you thought Bucha was bad, then you didn't go to Izum. And if you went to Izum and you thought Izum was bad, you haven't been to Mariupol. You haven't been to these areas where, as the Luhansk partisan himself says, Volodymyr Zhemshikov, he said, they won't give up the land because they know the fucking crimes will be uncovered.
Oh, exactly. I wrote an article this week saying the worst thing that happened to if you put your head on a Russian, the worst thing that could have happened was you didn't take Kiev. It's the worst because
Yeah,
you're still stuck in the same place as you were 4 years earlier. You've now got
right.
all these ICC indicted charges. You've now got war crimes that are still spewing on. There is no place other than escalation now.
Right,
It's not going to happen. We're at a point
right,
where Putin has to win this or die trying. And
right.
unfortunately, there's
Yeah,
going to be no negotiation. There's going to be no peace process. It's not going to happen
right.
because Putin can't do it. He's got too many skeletons in the closet now. He's failing.
I'm
His
okay with the bunker,
popularity's don't do it.
the bunker moment of the Hitler guy. For every Hitler
Yeah,
fan out there,
I
like,
don't think
show me your true
he's
commitment,
not.
go in the bunker and finish the deed.
He will
But
go till someone finishes him off.
that's
I'm
right,
not sure he's that way, and we're not going to. Let's be realistic about this. Ukraine is not going to invade Russia and go all the way to Moscow. It's just not going to happen.
right.
So I don't think it's ever going to get to that point. I don't think he will ever try, but I think his popularity is going. I think that people are seeing through his narrative. I think 60% of
Yeah,
Russia's connected to
yeah,
Ukraine in some way. So
right.
I just don't think it's going to end well for him. I
Mm,
think I
no.
still say it's going to go the Gorbachev way. It'll be sabbatical or arrested, and then suddenly we'll get a new person pop up on the
Well,
screen.
Christine Hobbs says
Um,
right here. No, I'm sorry. Christine Hobbs here in our viewer space said any chance of a coup against him. And it's sort
no,
of,
I don't think
it's
so.
not a coup. And you just mentioned the
No,
Gorbachev reality. If
yeah,
I'm blessed to be in my now past mid 50s. I'm 56, where I have a pretty strong memory of those eras, and I go back and I constantly reread what happened. Um, and there's a point where Russia has frequently had these kind of seizures, where for stability of the future, someone goes down. But I had a article 2 days ago after Trump's ceasefire completely fell apart on him, called "The Man Who Couldn't End the War He Started." Trump threatened to wipe out a civilization, folded to Pakistan 88 minutes before his own deadline, declared victory, and tried to land it. And as I'm reading this, every time I off to the side, I keep saying "The Man Who Couldn't End the War He Started." You're talking about Putin. I'm like, isn't it really kind of synchronistic, at least? I wouldn't say ironic because that means there's a juxtaposition, but synchronistic that two guys can't end wars they started.
yeah. I mean, I honestly think. Okay, we're on another subject. I honestly think Putin was stuck in the Soviet mindset that
Hmm.
and believed his own hype that he invaded, thinking he was going to take Kyiv in 3 days. I mean, it's quite clear
Correct.
on that now. Okay, so let's fast forward, and we understand he made a mistake. Let's not go over that old ground.
Hmm.
However, I think Trump has just done exactly the same thing, despite watching Putin go into this situation he's in now, and done exactly the same with Iran. And you hit the nail on the head. It's a civilization. It's not. It's not some Taliban. It's not the
Right. Right.
ISIS. It's not. This is a civilization who's got their
Right.
shit together. Who's been planning this scenario for years, and
Right.
has now really got Trump by the balls.
Right.
And he's got himself into this mess, which is why now he's going after NATO, why he wants to pull for NATO, why he's
And
blaming
CNN.
NATO. It's typical Russian propaganda. It's
He's going to
exactly what they
arrest
do.
CNN
Deflect.
now. That's the other
Oh,
reason.
I
That's the
mean,
other thing
it's
I put in
everything.
my
He's saying
article.
BBC, CNN, NATO. It's everybody
No, I'm
else
saying, but
apart from
Donald
him.
Trump, when he couldn't declare victory over Iran, literally threatened to arrest people at CNN. That shows you
China
how
are the
desperate he
ones
is.
to
Right.
watch.
Oh
China
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
was talking about taking into Taiwan,
Right.
and now has watched Russia make an absolute balls up at this.
Yeah.
Now they've watched America make an absolute cock end of this shit in
Right.
Iran. And now they're sitting there going, hold on a minute, we're going to need more drones, more military, more money, and we could end up in the same position. So they're on a win-win, because if Russia collapses, they're going to go straight into those disputed territories on the border. They're going to
Hmm.
protect their investments. If Russia collapses, they're going to go in and push on Russia. They need America as much as America needs China. So that I'm pretty sure they're not going to go into Taiwan right now, because they're just watching all this shit go together and go, well, the drones are the new thing. But China looks like it's way ahead of America and Europe on drones. You just
Right.
have to see their drone displays and the New Year celebrations using drones to realize that they've got their shit together. They know exactly where this war's going. It
Correct.
is China you need to be worried about, because they look streets ahead of America. Who and this week the armored corps, the British military, put out a video on the internet showing guys
Right.
using Second World War tactics going into a village, really sort of trying to promote the armored corps of Britain, and everybody in Ukraine went, "What the fuck are you doing? You're all going to die before you get there if you do that." All bunched up together behind a guy in an open cab on an armored vehicle, sitting outside. The guys on the top smoking a fag, going, "Let's go in and take this village." It's like,
Right.
hold on a minute, dude. You clearly don't understand what you're going into in a modern day conflict. So, NATO's is the gold standard. It's not. NATO should be the gold standard. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is this war's evolving monthly, and
Mm-hmm.
how do you funnel that through to a NATO army when the war's evolving every month and things are changing every 6 months considerably. Russia, Ukraine's now building its own ballistic missiles. It's now building
Correct.
its own defensive capabilities. It's now probably
That's
the
right.
leader in the world on drone
It,
warfare.
it is. It is
Yet
absolutely the
Trump's the
leader in
only
the
one
world,
going, "We don't need Ukraine."
we
You know,
mentioned the Middle East thing because when I don't know where I feel very blessed when someone says just the one thing that makes me go, oh, article, hold on, and I just have to I literally just go into the tunnel and I sit down and I talk about Zelensky securing 10 security deals in the Arab countries. You know, he went right to Washington and basically says, I can give you, oh, you don't want them. Marhaba, kifahalek, so
yeah, yeah,
he
yeah,
switches over to Arabic and goes,
exactly,
hey,
yeah.
can we make a deal? Yeah, okay. And there are already agreements. But Japan, Sweden, and other countries, Japan just announced the same thing, an initiative to work on interceptor drones using their technology, and they're actually developing them here in Kharkiv region, no less. So those
Yeah, and
interceptor
that's
drones are
caused a
being done
problem in
here.
Japan because the
Exactly.
Japanese ambassador to Russia has now been called to the Russian, the Kremlin, because
Yeah.
they want to know why they're going into bed with
Yeah.
Ukraine,
Yeah.
which has now made this war in Iran has actually gone against Trump in a way because it's pushed Ukraine into a global market.
Which is what made me laugh when I put that article out the other day and I went on a one-to-one with our audience here. I don't know, it's probably 10 minutes in and I just said, well, the thing is, and I just gut laughed, genuinely gut laughed,
Mm.
that Putin has so miscalculated that his only friend in the Middle East are terrorists and Iran.
Yeah, pretty much.
So Hezbollah,
And
Hamas,
that's
and
that's
Iran.
a that's a marriage of convenience to a
Yeah.
degree. That ideologically they're just so
And more
far
importantly, it
apart.
puts the power in those countries to keep like they have the power over Russia now. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, these countries have power over the much like I don't know if you
Caucasus,
yeah,
they're
exactly.
going
I
to
don't know
come
if you've
into
heard of this
play.
this one country called Turkey,
Armenia.
where there's this one called country called Turkey, you know? So Turkey, you remember Turkey, right? Yeah. Uh, where an ambassador walked into a gallery and was fucking executed. And what was
Executed.
the responses? And when a
Yeah.
plane goes down, what's the response? You notice that Russia knows not to fuck with Turkey. Why? So the fact that these countries now are openly working with Zelensky tells you everything about his miscalculation.
Even if America pulled out of NATO, I'm pretty sure NATO would sit there and say,
Oh,
Ukraine, come
so I have
in.
an article on that real quick for everyone. Calm yourself. Donald Trump can saber rattle all he fucking wants. There's actually passage in Congress that's signed into law. I just didn't finish this
Yeah.
article because all this. He literally can't just suddenly pull out of NATO. He
No,
can
but he
he
can
can
move troops
damage
though.
it. He can damage
Yeah, he
it.
can damage it. Yeah,
Okay, and he can play
exactly.
games, but the way in which it's currently working, he cannot forever. I'm glad we could just verbally say it now before I even put the article on. He cannot just unilaterally withdraw from NATO. It is actually not
No.
only not. It was never going to be easy anyway, but it's literally codified law that. Ironically, the co-signer of the law that we're talking about started in 2023 with a guy named Marco, what's his last name? Rubio, and it was passed in 2024, was signed into law.
Sold his soul to the
Yeah,
devil.
exactly, the NDAA, and essentially not able to do that without a two-thirds majority of Congress, and it's something he cannot do. But he can do damage. He can weaken the alliance in such a way that it's going to take the next administration a lot of work to rebuild it
Yeah.
and do something. Yeah. So
I can't see. I mean, I can't see. I'm friends with Adam, so I listen to a lot of what he says politically because he knows
yeah,
more
yeah,
about that than me. And Adam can see he's a really good gauge. And but he was a former Republican who's fell out with, doesn't particularly like Trump, would be the nice
right,
way to put it. But Trump's MAGA bases, he just fell out with him this week considerably.
right,
So like we touched on earlier, I think a bit of head pain. Eventually, he'll just stroke some egos, and suddenly they'll all
right,
fall back into line because that's MAGA.
right.
But generally, I think Americans, you know more about me. I think generally speaking, to a lot of Americans, they're just extremely disappointed, and let
Yeah,
down. Even so I can honestly say. I'm not too. I'm kind of hoping we'll get a win-win. I'm kind of pushing for the Orban gets kicked out, and then Trump loses the midterms, and then we're sort of, apart from Germany and where that's going, and where they're going. I think we're pretty
yeah,
much. That's a lot of doors closed for Putin.
yeah.
Could be a lot of more doors opening for Ukraine. I
Oh,
think that's a
someone
really
they're
good thing to
mentioning
point
NATO
out.
and U.S. in our comments. So let me answer a couple of those with saying I like that
Yeah.
Zelensky said, "Well, if U.S. withdraws from NATO, that means that UK needs to rejoin the EU." So much for Brexit. But let me answer our friends here because, and I'm sorry, I'm going to take this from the piece I haven't finished to put out yet. But Article 13 of the North Atlantic Treaty, signed in Washington in April 4th, 1949, states after the treaty has been enforced for 20 years, the party may cease to be a party 1 year after its notice of denunciation has been given to the government of the United States. Interesting. Everyone else has to give the notice to the United States of America, which happens to be the holder of these things. It's very strange. Um, but the United States would be a different, which will inform the governments of the other parties of the deposit of each notice of denunciation. This is actually the NATO Charter, but this law that we're talking about, the wall that Congress built. Um, Section 20, Section 1250A of the National Defense Authorization Act for the fiscal year of 2024 prohibits the president from withdrawing the United States from NATO without the approval of the Senate or statutory authorization. It is the first and foremost the only thing statute of its kind. The statute explicitly states that the president bars the president from suspending, terminating, denouncing, or withdrawing from NATO unless backed by 2/3 of the supermajority or an act of Congress. It also prohibits the use of federal funds to support such a withdrawal. So there you go.
Yeah, he can fuck some shit up before he goes. I think that's where he's at.
And and again, the man who co-sponsored that legislation, who stood in the United States Senate in 2023 and declared that no U.S. president should be allowed to withdraw from NATO without Senate
Oh yeah,
approval,
Rubio.
is Marco Rubio.
Marco
Dun, dun,
Rubio.
dun,
Yeah,
dun.
yeah. Oh, to
Bitch,
be
I
honest,
brought the
he was
receipts.
like, here's Rubio's just sold his soul to the devil. You
Right.
can't really, you just have to see that picture of him at the Oval Office where he went to, Vance and Trump went to town on Zelensky to see where he sat with it. That's now a meme that's going like all around X and all the platforms. And yeah, I quite look forward to seeing how Rubio's dressed up as something else, a Viking, and
Yeah.
anything they put him in now. He's now running Venezuela. It's like
You
a
see,
tash on
you see
everything.
why Dan Bongino went back to podcasting, right?
Yeah, I do, yeah, and I can see why everybody's leaving the Trump administration now because I can see them all doing exactly the same thing. If he didn't sack them, they're now leaving because it's just it's very badly run.
Let me quote, since I'm quarter Czech, let me quote Petr Pavel. And I think you posted this screenshot earlier. Yes? Did you post the Czech response? I
Oh,
think I
it
picked
did,
it.
yeah. I mean, it did.
Thank you.
I
You get to be part of
absolutely,
my
yeah.
article. So Czech President Petro Pavel, former NATO military commander, no, let's put it directly. Over the past few weeks, Trump has done more to reduce NATO's credibility than Vladimir Putin has managed over many, many years.
Exactly. I mean, I read an
Damn.
article about this week about NATO. You don't really understand NATO, and if you do, you're just ignoring the fact that And why are you ignoring the fact that you don't understand outages? Because you're fucking working for Russia, you fucking dick. Excuse me, French. That's where we're sort of sitting at, with Trump. I mean, it's just like, he's doing so many things now to push the Russian agenda. There's so many decisions coming out of Washington now that essentially are really benefiting Moscow, including the billions that are now going into his war coffers and everything else. I mean, it's just absolutely dreadful. I mean,
That's
it's
it.
absolutely everything that there's nothing that doesn't not benefit Putin. So, you have to start asking these questions about whether or not whose side are you actually on. You're certainly, from what I get, is Trump's exactly where Orban's sitting. He's batting for
Right.
Russia.
Right.
He's paid for Russia. And then you've got to sit there. I wasn't a compromat person. I wasn't a
Right.
guy that sat there and went, no, a president wouldn't do that, go against the
Mm-hmm.
Americans. But now I'm sitting there going, clearly, Russia have got something on him. And if Russia's got something on him, you're damn right Mossad has. And if Mossad's got it, you can guarantee the Chinese have got it. So,
Right.
you can only see these transcripts that have been released this week of the Ukrainian foreign minister talking to Sergei Lavrov, where you sit there and go, there's a lot of people that know what's going on who are just not saying it yet. Those
That's
first
right.
transcripts of Sergei Lavrov talking to the Hungarian foreign minister, Peter
I can never say his name.
Peter? I
I
can
don't
never say
speak.
his last name.
I don't speak enough Hungarian. Sorry.
Those first ones were a warning.
Right.
They were a warning. And he just totally disregarded the warning. And now you've got the main crux of it come out. The second lot of transcripts that have come out, which is
Right.
so obviously you've had the warning, you've not listened to what we've got to say. Now we're going to let all of them go. Maybe all of them, but enough that it now looks like you're working with Sergei Lavrov and you're, the Kremlin's bitch. So
That's
he's
right.
literally passing, EU confidential documents live time to Russia so they can then orchestrate a response to aid getting to Ukraine. That is a legal issue. That is a
Precisely.
real legal issue. So you're going to sit there and have this legal battle now to the point where the EU has now got to grips and said, hold on, we need to stop this. There's Russian agents in here. We now need to crack down on this and then even if a new regime comes in, unless the new regime in Hungary or the new government, sorry, slip of the tongue, the new government comes into Hungary, unless they do something about that, they're part of the EU again. Unless they do something, it's going to look incredibly weak on the EU if they don't do something to enforce that. I mean, if you're giving confidential documents from EU meetings to the Russians, that surely is a serious offence.
Absolutely. I actually just had to look back. I was like, when did I write this one particular post? I had a post I wrote on January 11th. Okay, so I've enjoyed this platform, by the way. I love Substack now.
I do,
I could
yeah.
write a piece and then we can all come up here and talk about it. But then I had to go back like, when was that piece? Like, oh my God, I've written a lot of articles since then. I wrote a piece on January 11th called How America Talks Itself Out of Europe, the Rhetoric That Threatens U.S. Power, Allies, Consent, and the Fragile Architecture Behind America's Global Power. And it was all provoked by one German MP who said, well, you can get the fuck off our bases then.
Yeah, I mean, we're all saying it
And I
now.
went,
If you're going to go, just fucking
when he
go.
said that,
Excuse
I
my
went to the
friend. I'm
cafe
swearing a lot tonight. I apologise. I
because you're
really
hanging out with
apologise to
you're
you.
hanging out with the wrong crowd. I do it a lot.
I'm venting. I'm
Biz debs.
venting.
So, but when he said that, I went to the cafe and sat down and started harvesting a lot of data about how many bases we have, where they're located, and how many troops are on there. And I'm kind of facile with the Vienna Convention because of other eras where I was studying security abroad, like Benghazi. You know, who's responsible for the security at the compound? Yeah, the people you just insulted their profit. Yeah. Oops. So if
Blue-haired, was it blue-eyed, blonde-haired Westerners? That's
right,
who's in
right.
charge of the
So
compound.
if we don't understand that we are on their property, not our property. That is not our property. That is their property. And therefore, the power that is superpower oriented for America is actually generated by these cooperations. So for everything he says about we won't be in NATO anymore, it's like, well, get the fuck off. So where are you going to be based in Ohio? Yeah. There goes all the superpower treatment that comes out of America. All those things that make America as powerful as it is evaporate very quickly, and they're beginning to evaporate right now. They're evaporating because Donald Trump is single-handedly destroying the bond that created this American supremacy. And it's one of the things that's the flip side of the positive. So I want to go to the positive side first, real quick. Because you live here, you and I. The benefit of this broadcast to our friends. First off, let me say, follow Sean's account if you're not already, and I think you are. Pay for that subscription, $5 a month at the very least. Pay Sean's subscription rate so we keep him here and build that number up. We just passed 900 on my account, and we're going to go for 1,000. We want to be above 1,000 by the end of this month. I think we can do it because we've built 900 from 18 in December to 900 now. Now, that being said, you and I live here. We know how much the Ukrainians love American culture, American things,
Yeah.
British
Massively.
culture,
Massively.
and so much so that influence is a big deal that will keep the positive side of the coin going. But the negative side is the more that gets spoiled from a Donald Trump and his minions, the JD Vance side playing politics and interference games in Hungary, is that the power that becomes America's greatness evaporates, and
Well, how much
something
have we
else
talked about Trump
something else will
tonight? And
arise.
how much have we talked about Trump tonight? And how much have we talked about Putin? I bet we talked 70% about Trump
That's
tonight.
exactly it. That's it.
And Trump takes the opposite out of him. He shields Putin. He
Right.
deflects everything coming off Putin. This is an ICC wanted war criminal who's conducted one of the biggest wars in Europe since World War II. 6 million
Thank you.
forced
Exactly.
internally displaced refugees. He's 1.3 million of his own citizens who are now killed or injured in an absolute calamity of an invasion in 2022. That's
Right.
before you even get onto Ukraine. This is involving millions,
Right.
millions and millions. Yet we're still hitting there talking about Trump,
That's
America,
right.
Iran.
Right.
This is someone who's a country, Russia, that's killed so many Christians, evangelicals, Catholics, targeting Catholic religious places in religious worshiping places in Ukraine, churches. That's the word I'm looking for. Churches. It is a massive undertaking. Putin and a legacy he's left. Yeah, we're still talking about Trump. We're talking about Iran, his failures. We're talking about Trump because America has such an impact on the West, and which we talked about earlier. And we're still sitting there, talking about the fuck ups in Iran, and so that's where we sit in the world, where Ukraine isn't even getting a look in, even when Russia's escalated its terrorism in Ukraine during this Iranian attacks, and unfortunately, I don't think the American government is so ignorant to not understand that. It's got a huge backroom staff, even though Witkoff and Kushner are probably third, fourth, fifth rate, and self-centered and for the family. But it has a big backroom staff who completely understand politics and how to project your agenda. And so when you sit there and you think, JD Vance has now just gone to Hungary to back Orban, who's just been released on transcripts as being a Russian owned by the Russians. Then you sit there, you're talking about an American vice president who's knowingly gone over to Hungary, who I have to think that the Americans would have copies of these transcripts. They're not, they must have known what J.D. Vance was walking into, or somebody set him up as a fall guy.
Yeah.
It opened so many doors.
Well, this is where I may call at some point in the next week. Maybe we'll see if we can do it next week. Call up friends of mine who are experts in counterintelligence and say,
yeah, absolutely.
how do you read the current tea leaves? Because in the old days, someone like Ana Luna would come back and someone would want to sit them down and go, hey, Congress member, we need to have a talk about what you said today. Maybe you don't know this, but in that phone call that you had, and yes, we listened in, but we listened in because, well, you said some very wrong things. And for our viewers, there was actually a case of this in the early 70s. There was a congressional staffer who testified about Soviet housing who came back up and said, oh, it was all solved. And the experts, no, why is he saying that? Just got back from one of these trips. Holy shit. And they went and had a debriefing to go, no, that is not what happened. That is not what's going on. When the American intelligence has been gutted, and I said this, you were mentioning Putin's failure in the first weeks here, like they literally had uniforms for people who did not hear this or did not hear us say this before. They had uniforms in those BMPs to have a parade in Maidan within days, and it didn't happen, which means the problem in that espionage side was that FSB had ample fucking intelligence. What they did not have is the culture of telling the truth to Putin. It was a cultural issue. However, with Trump, it's different. He's gutted it. He's gutted the information sphere that would tell him. So there are not counterintelligence agents, counterintelligence units 12 that covered Iranians, gutted by Kash Patel. So when they don't have those things, when you have Tulsi Gabbard who can't tell the truth, when you have Pete Hegseth who's lying to him, and you have a syphilitic leader who wants to hear lies, this is not in Sun Tzu's metric.
No, we're back
to
Putin's playbook again.
Right.
The Trump administration incorporated, even down to the individuals. Unfortunately, that's where we're at the moment. I mean, who knows what's going to happen next week? I'm going to Canada next week anyway. I'm going to do some talks. I got some talks in Canada next week where we're going to be talking to the psychiatric community and the Ukrainian Canadians, which is a big community in Edmonton. So we're going to be doing 3 or 4, and Toronto University, where Professor Timothy Schneider works. So I'm kind of hoping he'll drop in. It'd be interesting.
Get his number. Let's bring him on. He was actually on earlier with Philip O'Brien. Pretty good talk. In good news this week, Moldova broke out from the Commonwealth of Independent States, which has been around since 1991. That's good. So there's another crumbling block for Russia. And also, Ukraine stepped up its attacks and actually also intercepted pretty good rate this week. So, the regain of territory. What was the number I put on our grid earlier? I sent you. Hold on.
Just looking out.
480 square kilometers in Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk in gains, and the skirmishes in the past basically 24 hours, 160 daily combat engagements, very high. So it's a very active situation, but at the same time, I'm kind of just wondering how much more Putin can put this fight up, and we'll see. So again, subscribe to Shaun's account. Paid subscriptions go a long way. He's not going to say it. I will. I'm a journalist. I'll be a self pimp right now because I'll have to do it. I also work on your support. And why do I want to say this right now? Because you said something earlier about the ability to focus on things. You said that no one would want to hire a 52-year-old POW who's it. No, everyone who's watching, you're the hiring crowd. You're the one that for $5 each, or if you do the 80 for the year, you're the one who's saying, "Thank you, Shaun, for doing the work. Here's some money so you can go focus on that instead of your bills."
Since you're going on, this money goes towards helping us take Russia to court in UK courts. We're now in the High Courts. We submitted paperwork to the High Courts, which will be a landmark case. If we win,
That's it.
then we will be. It will enable Ukrainians to then sue the Russian government because it's not happened before.
Right.
So we're literally. I'm hoping this weekend there'll be a press release in the national papers in the UK. Then I can put it out to my Substack, which will then sort of talk to everybody and let everybody know that this has been a 3-year process of funding it ourselves to take Russia
Right.
to court, which would be the first individual person to take a state to court.
Right.
And hopefully then we can get some money. Doesn't replace people that are lost or houses that have been, taken by the Russians, but some people are in a worse situation than us. Lost arms, legs, people, fathers, grandfathers, lost houses as well. 6 million forced refugees. So we're kind of hoping that, if we win, it will set precedent, and then everybody else can then claim against the Russian state, which could involve billions, hopefully.
I'm hoping that I'm going to Chernihiv this weekend, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm hoping to come back from Canada with a good report from there,
Yeah.
which I'll be doing when we talk next Friday. I'll be in Canada, so we'll have a chat then.
Yeah.
And
And the reason why I said is one of our great friends, Dennis Glushko, who I hope will come back on here soon, wrote earlier, we've got some potentially good news that may come out this weekend. And the reason why I say you may remember Bodanov said this about 2 weeks ago. We may have an Easter exchange of our
I'm kind of
defenders.
hoping, yeah. I know the
So
guy
I
that's
hope
involved
I
in
hope I'll be either,
exchanges.
if not going to Chernihiv, at least I'll be getting some news from around our community that defenders will be returned, and I really hope
I
they'll
know
be.
the guy that's involved in exchanges. If I wasn't, he invited me would I be interested in going? I don't know if there is one, but he said, would you be interested in going? I said, yes, I would be, but I'm going to
Absolutely.
Canada.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'd love to those exchanges, having been
Send him
on
my
one
number and
myself.
tell him I'm on my way because
Ah,
I'm
good.
free to go. Yeah, it's
But yeah,
important.
definitely,
This
yeah.
is, and let me say, I see. I have really been glad to pull you out of my Sean the POW mode because that's not how you are. You're not in that category in my head, which is a good
I'm
thing actually.
angry. Inside, I'm angry. That's
Yeah,
why I feel.
exactly. But really, that is the community very close to my heart. And I said this earlier when I was talking about my mental well being and my mental health. Um, you have to take care of your mental health here in war.
Mm.
And one of the ways I've done it is when I get beyond what my pains have been and my aggravations, is that there's someone out there like my friend Svetlana, who we hope her fiance Leonid comes home, a 501 battalion brother, and I really enjoy that I get to banter a lot with my friend like Yarek, who's a Marine out there in Lviv. They want you to come out there with us when we can. When you get back, we should go out to Lviv and hang out with some of the guys who are in rehabilitation out there. And these guys are so special to me. I mean, they're brothers who, if everything had worked, we would never know each other, but we do know each other. And for all the ones I know who are home, we have a whole list of guys we're praying will get returned and families reunited, and then the recovery mode will kick in. And so, for everyone who's watching, please do your part to pray that we have an exchange this weekend. It would be very, very
Yeah, please. Yeah, or to get some friends home. We need them home. We've got so many
good. Yeah,
still in captivity. It's
yeah.
unbelievable.
And our
From
children
Mariupol.
that's one of the big ones I'm saying, and because it would be the 3-year anniversary for April 12th is a kind of a big day on that calendar because it was such a for those who don't know that time period, but to the 12th into May, the captures were beginning to happen, and the 12th is a particular big one for a lot of my
Yeah,
Marine friends.
few days. Yeah,
Yeah,
few days. I'll be putting something on social media about it anyway.
yeah.
But
But
yeah,
if we
it's a
get
big
good
2 days.
news, I'll come to you about it. And either way, that's the deal. So, brother, thank you as always.
Thank you
Great
for having
discussion.
me. Thank you for everybody who's 60. That's pretty good
Yeah,
for viewing.
it's
So
not
thank you very
Timothy
much.
Schneider level. He's at 1.5K. Timothy Snyder jumps on here and gets 1.5K. I think that's awesome. By the way, not I'm not in the jealous category of that thing. There's some people when I go, Who's this fucker that I came to Ukraine and I got 500,000 views? You went to one video on YouTube and you get 500,000 views. I live here. I can't get 160 views. But Timothy Snyder getting that is awesome. The fact that Timothy Snyder gets such good traffic on this platform, I think, is fucking incredible. It is
I do too.
beautiful. It means that people have a certain value system that says that they want to hear what this guy has to say. And here Timothy Snyder is highly respected, very,
It's a
very well
war
respected.
effort. It's an absolute war effort.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I throw it to you. Just think, you've got.
yeah,
I was a trigger puller in the Marines 4 years ago, in captivity, and now I'm here talking to you with
yeah.
1,500 subscribers, talking to 60 people tonight. It's not the 60 people tonight. It's not the 1,500 subscribers. It's the ripple effect that creates. If
Correct.
they enjoyed hearing us talk tonight, they go and tell their friends. They go and say, you should listen to these guys because they're on. And then that ripple effect goes out. And that's where we get the most benefit, when people
Yeah,
share, what we're talking about. And they go, I didn't know that. I had
yeah.
no idea that happened.
Well,
And I'm
let's
not.
pay it. Let's give it back to this audience. So we're going to do it exactly that way. To all of you who are watching, you have to know how much Shaun and I really, really like. You may look at us going, "Oh, thank you," and all this, and we appreciate that. But in reverse, we feel that way about you guys because we look at those numbers throughout the week and go, "They're seeing the message." And some of you reboosted, and we watch those posts and if you didn't do that, this would be very, very difficult to do. We would still
Yeah,
be
we
telling
get
the news,
several
but we
thousand, I
value
think,
you so
over.
much.
We get several thousand over, several platforms now, which is great.
Yeah,
So we
yeah,
get 60 on here live. We'll probably get another 1,000 on mine, another whatever on yours, and
yeah.
then it goes to YouTube and upload it on there. And we get another 300-400 on there, and then it goes out into over time, and then that ripples out, and that's where we get the most effect. Is
Right.
essentially is people sharing that information.
That's it. And I'll use a phrase that Brittany just put in the space, razom, but I'm going to give it to you. So we'll do our little Ukrainian language as we say goodbye. Ми працюємо разом. Ми, that's us, we, okay? Працюємо. We work разом, together. Ми працюємо разом. До перемоги, to the victory. There you go. And that's how it is, my bro. So we'll see you soon. Slava Ukraini.
See you, everybody. Good night. Have a good night. See you,
Slava
buddy.
Ukraini.
Bye-bye. Героям слава.
І
Слава
пиздець
нації.
смерть ворогам. І пиздець Російської Федерації.